Some of the Christchurch traffic cameras along the route of a police chase that turned fatal were not working. Why will be part of the investigation into the crash. An innocent man driving to work was killed when a Toyota the police were chasing smashed into his Hyundai at an intersection in Fendalton just after 4 a.m. The 5 people in the fleeing vehicle were injured in the crash, one of them critically. The police say they've extended their condolences to the partner of the dead man, and the staff involved are deeply shocked by what's happened. Earlier, I spoke to Superintendent Lane Todd and asked him why the car drew police attention in the first place.
At this stage, one of our patrol cars, which was on night shift in Christchurch City, observed the vehicle travelling in what they described as an erratic manner. As a result of that, they activated the red and blue lights and siren, obviously with the intention of stopping and talking to the driver as a result of the driving. It was shortly thereafter that the vehicle sped off, and then a short pursuit ensued.
All right, can we just pause there? So I want to be clear about what erratic behaviour is. What was the vehicle actually doing?
Well, look, those are matters that we'll be canvassing as far as the investigation goes.
But have you asked the officers? Have you been told? I'm sure you would have at this point.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so what was it doing?
Well, that's all part of the wider investigation, but what I would say at this stage is that the driving was erratic, and the police officers had concerns in relation to the way the vehicle was being driven.
So what? It was speeding? Did they suspect drink driving? Can you give us a little bit more so people can appreciate this? It's an incredibly serious situation. A member of the public is dead as a consequence. So could you just give us some details about why this car attracted police attention?
Yes, well, it's without going into the detail too much, but some of those assumptions you're making is what's attracted the police officers to the way the vehicle was driven. So
it was speeding?
Yes, there was potentially some of that, but also just the way it was driving. So in other words, not staying within the lane, and I'm going to describe it as erratic because I don't want to go to the details at this stage because that's part of the wider investigation.
Can you confirm that this was not a stolen vehicle?
We did confirm after several hours that the vehicle was not stolen.
Okay, so how did the collision happen?
So the vehicle, this is the Toyota vehicle, was being actively pursued by a police vehicle, and as it approached the intersection of Glandovey and Idris Road, unfortunately that Toyota vehicle has collided with a secondary vehicle that was driving through that intersection, and unfortunately T-boning that vehicle as a result of that.
What can you tell us about the occupants of the vehicle that the police were pursuing? At the time that the pursuit started, had the police identified that there were 5 people in the car? Did you know generally the ages of those people?
So at this stage, that's more detail that will come out fully with the investigation, other than to say that the officers did note that there were several people in the vehicle. They, at that early stage, weren't aware of ages. And weren't aware of exact numbers inside that vehicle, other than there were a group of people in it. So
were the actions of the driver here serious enough to warrant a pursuit? Because you will be fully aware of the IPCA report that was released earlier in the year into fleeing drivers, and your own policy is, and I'll read it, the fact that a driver fails to stop when signalled does not in itself justify a pursuit. Explain to us why this pursuit was justified.
So, look, that's matters that will be part of the wider investigation, but what I would say at the early stage is that the officers had 3 concerns. So one concern was the erratic driving behaviour of the vehicle. They were also making inquiries and concerned that the vehicle may have been stolen. And bearing in mind, as I've just indicated, several hours later we established that that wasn't the case. But for the officers concerned at that time, they were making inquiries and were not confirmed that the vehicle was stolen at that stage. So that was another concern they had. And then the third thing was whether potentially the driver was a drunk driver, again based on the erratic behaviour of the driving.
So does the risk that was perceived from this vehicle, did it warrant, in your view, the commencement of a pursuit? Because that's the decision that was made at the time.
Yes, so look, our officers have to go through a risk assessment, which I'm sure you can appreciate every time they're dealing with an incident. So I'm satisfied at this early stage that they did follow through with that, a risk assessment at that time, and bearing in mind
prior
also
to
that we have
prior to beginning the chase, because again, that's one of the recommendations, isn't it? That the
Yes.
threat assessment is done
Yes.
prior to commencing the pursuit. So
Correct.
was that done?
Yep. Look, at the early stages of the investigation, because bearing in mind we're only a few hours into it, I'm satisfied that they've followed that process, and bearing in mind also that we have a communications inspector that is actually controlling it from afar, so in other words from the communications centre, and that commissioned officer was also doing the risk assessment. So at this early stage they were satisfied that the actioning of the pursuit was justified under our policy. But those are matters that we will have to canvass, obviously, as part of the wider investigation.
What about the continuation? Because the start is one thing. So the pursuit
Yes.
went for just over 4 minutes. Is that that seems longish? Nobody called it off, correct? At the time of the crash, the pursuit was still underway.
Yes, that's correct. And bearing in mind, 4 minutes is relatively short period of time. 4 minutes isn't a long time. But bearing in mind, during that 4 minute period, the risk assessment continues all the time. So in other words, the driver, the passenger of the police vehicle, the communications dispatcher, and also the communications inspector, those risk assessments are happening throughout that whole 4 minutes.
What speed was the police car going at the time of the crash?
That's to be determined as part of the wider investigation.
Over 50 kilometres an hour?
That's to be determined as part of the wider investigation. I'm not going to go into the details
there's high public interest in this, Superintendent. So what I'm asking you is, were they exceeding the designated speed limit for the area that they were in?
That's part of the wider investigation.
You must know
and
that
there's two
now.
or three reasons why I'm not going to go into the detail for that, because, we have to do an investigation, and part of that is doing thorough assessments on CCTV cameras, getting evidence from vehicles, talking to potential witnesses, talking to the occupants of the vehicles.
Aren't the
there's a lot of work to do.
The police officers required to give you situation reports during the pursuit as part of that? Speed is one of those things. So at the last report, how fast were they going?
Well, I'm not going to disclose that at the moment because that's part of the investigation.
So over 50 k's?
I'm not going to disclose it because that's
I'm
part
not
of the wider
asking you the
investigation.
exact speed. I understand that you need to ascertain that, but I think it's fair for the public to know whether they were exceeding the speed limit for the area that they were in.
Yes, they were exceeding 50 kilometres per hour.
The shift commander who takes control of the pursuit, and you've said they were in control of the pursuit at the time, have you discussed with them why it's continued, why they allowed it to continue?
I've had a what we call a hot debrief with them, but in terms of the wider investigation, those are matters that will be pursued. But from what my understanding was, having come in and spoken to the high-ranking officers that were actively involved in the matter, that those risk assessments were carried out prior to and during. And at this stage, from what I've been advised, is that the pursuit was not called off based on the risk assessments that were carried out throughout.
And that proved to be wrong, that risk assessment then?
Well, that's a matter for the investigation to find.
Do you not think that the death of one person proves that the risk assessment was incorrect?
Look, absolutely. It's a tragic event for everyone involved. And as I said, our condolences are absolutely with the family of that poor gentleman that was unfortunately has passed away as a result of this. So there's absolutely no doubt in my mind this is a tragic event. What we have to do is to work through the various processes to find out exactly what's occurred. And bearing in mind we're only a few hours since this incident occurred, it's too early for us to give a definite answer around those. Having said that, I certainly acknowledge that the public will want to know the outcome.
And I understand that you are in an incredibly difficult position, but the fact that you have an innocent bystander dead brings us back to the core question as to whether the risk of the pursuit was worth it. You have a vehicle that's potentially speeding. It is not stolen. There seems to be limited other factors. In hindsight, was it worth it?
Look, hindsight's a great thing. And what I always have to do when I'm looking at these matters is to look at the police officers at that time with the information and the facts they have in front of them. They have a very clear risk process that they run through. It's all very well for you and I to discuss this, several hours after the event, knowing what we know now. We have to think about what those police officers were dealing with at that time and the information they had at that time.
And the information you've provided is potentially speeding and slightly erratic behaviour. Is that the benchmark for a police pursuit?
No, I don't think that's fair.
And that's Superintendent Lane Todd there.